Thank you, Caitlin. Hey, good morning. How's everyone doing today? You have been a great audience, so I think, we're going to do great. All right, so the first question I have for you, so as Kathleen said, this is about trust. I study trust. So, actually, when I tell people I do academic work on trust, people looked at me and said, what? You mean you can actually study trust? Isn't trust like what, just now the conductor Charles said? It's inspirational, it's wonderful. Can you really break it down? And I said, yeah. And we want to study it in the organizational context. All right, so this morning, I'm very happy to be here to share with you what we have been doing, in terms of research on how people think about trust and why you would trust one person over another. All right, so I have a first question to start off today. All right, so generally speaking, all right, I want each one of you to think about this. Would you say that, number one, most people can be trusted? Or number two, that you need to be very careful in dealing with people? All right, so I'd like to have a show of hands. 1 or 2. All right, so can I see all the ones? Oh, wow, this is a really trusting audience. How about the twos? More on this side than on that side, so very interesting. All right, so the question is there a difference? Why is there a difference? All right, so in the way we study it, what happens is we said, well, each one of us bring together with us an innate, all right, willingness to trust strangers at our first meeting. So last night, those people with the blue lanyard, you were here for the first time, right? So perhaps you don't know the other people very well. So last night I was here all by myself. I walked around, the reception twice, and I go like, so do I trust all these people, or do I want to think about whether I should talk to them or not? All right, so we bring, each one of us, to any new situation, this idea of, people can be trusted versus we need to be very careful. All right, so this is the start. Now, what happens when you get to know them better? All right, but before we get there, let me just show you some other very interesting studies, all right, about this idea of people trusting versus not with strangers. So, like I said, this is about general willingness to trust people. So look at these two pictures out here. Picture on the left, what country would you think that is? Japan? Does it look Japanese? Maybe not enough, but it's about Japan, all right? And the country on the right? Also not clear, America. All right, so what happened was very interesting. In the 90s, a bunch of researchers were studying trust in strangers, what they call social trust. And think Japan. Japan's a country where people are really wonderful, right? All of you have been to Japan? Love it? Yes. Japanese people are so hospitable too, just like the Thais. And then you said, okay, so they are all friendly people based on relationships. So they should be more willing to trust strangers, would they? Compared to the Americans. Or would Americans be more willing to trust strangers? 1 or 2? All right. So intuitively, in our academic research, we said, yeah, I think, Japanese people will have more social trust compared to the Americans. Yeah? Because, they are all about people, it's more communal. Americans are more individualistic as a culture. They look out mainly for themselves. All right, so that was the way people were thinking about it when they get into the research. But you know what happened? They found that that's not true. Americans actually trust others a lot more, trust strangers a lot more than the Japanese. And they said, it doesn't make sense. Why is that so? As it turns out, the Japanese have this very interesting phenomena called trust in the in-group. Meaning, if you talk to a Japanese person, they have in-groups and they have out-groups. All right, same for the Chinese person. In fact, very interestingly, if you were to ask any Chinese person, when they meet each other for the first time, the Chinese with the Chinese, what they will ask each other, what do you think the first question would be when two Chinese people from mainland China meet each other for the first time? What do you think the question would be? Huh? Where's your family? Very good. I thought you were going to say, have you had dinner or have you had lunch? The Chinese thinks about food all the time. Everything is about food. But no, actually they ask each other, where do you come from? All right? Are we from the same hometown? Because for them, that decides, all right, for them, whether you're part of the in-group or the out-group. And with the in-group, you give concessions more than the out-group. And that is how collectivistic cultures think about, people and relationships. As it turns out, it's the same for the Japanese people. They trust people in the in-group so much that they forgot, or rather, they would rather not trust anybody who's in the out-group. And that was something very counterintuitive, but we thought something really interesting. But that is about strangers, right? So what happens when you come here and you're trying to build a relationship with people? What went through your mind when you start thinking, how do I decide whether to trust this person or not? What do? Do you look at the faces? And you say, wow, that is a trustworthy face. I'm going to go trust this person. Is there such a thing? Yes or no? Do you think that's a trustworthy face? Well, you know what? Our research in the psychological sciences actually found a trustworthy face. And more than that, they said when people trust you, the pupils, the pupils, dilate. And you could tell, and you would, counterintuitively, you intuitively trust back. Interesting, isn't it? Well, those are not very conscious actions, right? We see faces and we see pupils, but that's not how we decide to trust somebody, is it? I mean, think about it. How did you meet your spouse? Your partner, right? Is it because of trustworthy face? Is it because the pupils are dilating? No, maybe there's something else, all right? But that is relationships. We want to talk about in the organization. What do we do? All right, so I have a bunch of questions for you, but before that, please humor me because I'm an academic. We love to define, the phenomena in question, all right? So when we said you trust somebody, what does that mean? We want to put it up front so that you know what I'm talking about before we move on, all right? So when you think about trusting somebody, what happens to you? When I say I trust Kai, what happens to me? What am I putting myself into? What am I getting into when I say I trust Kai? Danger! Very good. All of you know Kai, right? I think he's great danger. But no, I'm kidding. No. We'll know tonight. So anyhow, but we got danger is the right question, is the right answer. You know why? Because when we think about trust, we really are putting ourselves at risk. Am I right? It is. When I say I trust you, I'm saying you can do whatever you want to me. True? Not true? True. So tonight we'll see that. And because there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of vulnerability involved in trust. All right? And so what happens with it is, despite the fact that I know I'm putting myself at risk, despite the fact that I become vulnerable, what happens with me is that despite that, I'm still confident and I rely on you. Counterintuitive, isn't it? But just hold the thought, because I'm going to give you a framework for thinking about why we would actually trust somebody. What went into our head? How did we make those decisions? All right, so I'm going to give you a scenario, which I want you to think through and tell me your answers. All right, a polling thing isn't working, but we will put up your hands and we'll see how. All right, so this is very small. Let me read for you. John is a vendor. So somebody you meet somewhere, but you have met and you have worked with the person for a few months. All right, so this person, John. You notice that John manages his resources well, does not manage his resources well, and has problems meeting deadlines. So he, when it comes to work, he's not delivering. However, John has always been nice to you and cares for you and has a genuine concern for you. And John, through all your interaction, you know that he has always been honest and treats other people fairly, treats everybody fairly. All right, so think John, yeah? Number one, not very good in his work, but, cares for you, genuinely concerned about you, and more importantly, well, he also has good values. He is a fair guy. Is there a person such as John that you have met? All right, so my question for you is this. All right, how comfortable would you be sharing confidential information with John that could be quite damaging to you if the information got out? All right, so I'm an academic. We do all this research where we ask you, right, on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you vote? All right, 1 being, I'm totally afraid. 5 being, well, I'm totally comfortable. Okay, so Let's look at the two extremes. How many of you said, I'm totally afraid I'm a one? I don't want to share any information with John. Two people. Two people. 3, 4, 5, 5, 5, 6. All right. Only 6 in the entire room? How about the other extreme? 5. Come on, 5. Nobody? Can I have a show of hands of 5? Oh, not that many too. You guys are behaving like Asians. You know, in our Asian research, you know what we found? Asians on a scale of 1 to 5 sits with 2, 3, or 4. All right? But when we do it with Americans, Americans will do 1 or 5, and they'll go a long way. But looks like a lot of you are in between. Can I have a show of hands for 4? 4. Okay, quite a number. 3? Oh, you're absolutely Singaporean like me then. You know what Singaporeans do, right? We like to sit in the middle and wait, until things happen. Any 2s? Okay, so it looks like it's fairly evenly distributed, but I maybe sense a little bit more comfort. All right, so what you see here is someone who is not very good in the work, cares about you, and has good values. All right, so let me say that the first thing people think about when they see a picture like this is, we actually have 3 factors here. The first one is, despite ability, people seem to be sort of comfortable with John. All right, and let me say the first thing people look for when they think about trusting, all right, you, especially in the work context, especially in this context, is the idea of ability. Can you deliver? All right, so that is actually what we have up here. People think ability when they think of trust. Not ability in ourselves, not so much like what Charles was talking about, but ability in you, the person I'm trying to trust. Can you deliver? Are you good in your work? All right? Interestingly enough, the key is to be aware of yourself and your capability, but more importantly, deliver. Always deliver. Always be confident. All right? So that's the first thing. Hold the thought, because after this, we're going to have different combination. All right? 1. Second, let you meet somebody else called Alex. Alex is another person that you work with. All right, you have known her for a lot of time already, for several years. Alex has strong skills, so this Alex is different from John. Alex does well in her work, all right, and her work is of high quality. However, Alex seems to get along with everybody else except you. Your well-being is not important to Alex. All right, so Alex, goes out for lunch, hangs out with people. You tried very hard to work with Alex and said, let's go to lunch, let's hang out. And Alex said, no, it's okay, I don't really need to go out with you. All right? That's Alex. And one more thing about Alex is Alex always walks the talk, all right, and is always reliable. Cool? So this is a slightly different person from John. John is one where the work's not so good. This one is Alex where, Alex doesn't quite care for you. But everything else is good. Now, same deal on a scale 1 to 5. How confident are you with sharing that confidential information with Alex? Okay, let's try not to do 2, 3, 4. How's that? Let's polarize it a little bit. Either you go 1 or you go 5. Is that fine? Yeah. Okay, how many 1s? Whoa, really? Just because Alex doesn't want to go to lunch with you? Doesn't want to go drinking tonight? Oh, how about 5s? Totally comfortable. Wow. Very few. I'll say less than 10% of the room. What happened? Why is that so? Why is that relationship and caring for your well-being so important? Is it because we're in Bangkok? When we're in Bangkok, people get along, we're all about people, or is it because it's UFI? In UFI, if we are in it, we all get along and relationships are important. All right? And this is an interesting point because let me say, the second thing people think about is that relationship with each other. All right? And in fact, in our academic work, we said the second thing people think about when they think of trust, other than ability, is what we call benevolence. You go like, ugh, what is this about? Why is it a big term? Interestingly enough, benevolence was manifested just now in the opening speech. Remember Kai said something to the president of TSAP? He said what? He stood behind him and he said, I got your back. This is benevolence. All right, benevolence is when people have good intentions towards you, and will always cover your back. And that's the second thing we think about when we think about trust. Yes, no? Yeah? So, and we can see that just now in the discussion where when I said one, all of you put up your hands and said, we are not going to trust Alex. Whereas, in the earlier one with ability, it was kind of mixed. All right? So think ability, think benevolence. What is the third thing we think about when we think about trusting somebody? All right, so let me go on to another scenario. Trust me, this is the last one, all right? I don't want you to keep putting up your hands. Well, but you sang today, right? So putting up your hands is no big deal, no? All right, so this is a person called Jerry. All right, Jerry, you've worked with him or her for a number of years already and on a number of projects, like the ones out here. Jerry is always updated about his work, all right, or her work. Always accurate, always thorough, loves you, and always protects your interests. Really someone who cares about you. We'll go to lunch, we'll go drinking, would happen tonight, right? However, Jerry has an issue. Jerry is someone where people always wonder if he will stick to his word, all right? Jerry seems to do things for his personal gains. Let me say again, Jerry do things for his personal, all good. Ability good, loves you like anything, would go drinking, my dear, even though you're at risk, all right? And, however, he's a little bit, iffy. People don't know him for sure and think sometimes he's looking only for his own self-interest. Again, my favorite thing, 1 to 5, the ones. The ones, no, I will not share information. Whoa, almost everyone. How about the fives? Just one gentleman, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What happened? What happened? No way, you would share. You would share information with Jerry. You are comfortable, absolutely comfortable with him. You are Jerry. You know Jerry. Okay, great. All right. So it's quite clear, isn't it? When we think about trusting somebody, when it comes to benevolence, when it comes to integrity, people seem to feel that it's really absolutely important. All right? And let me say, this model that we think about, all right, is we're talking about integrity. So like I said, it's about having good principles, walking the talk, being consistent, being reliable, and always, looking out, all right, to be fair and to be just. Now, if you think about it, now I've already put up 3 things out here, right? Ability, benevolence, integrity. In your head, all right, what is the most important factor we think about when we compare the 3? You have been comparing, right? One at a time, but you put everything together. What is the non-negotiable when you meet each other and you want to build relationship with? Is it ability? Is it benevolence? Is it integrity? So let me say something really interesting. Think about ability. Where does it sit? Does it sit in you or it sits in the relationship? It sits in you, right? Like Kai is wonderful at his work. That's Kai's credibility because that's Kai's ability. Nothing to do with me, nothing to do with any of us in the room. Am I right? Think about integrity. It's your values. Does it sit with you or does it sit in the relationship? It sits with you, right? It doesn't sit in the relationship. But you think about it, trust is a relationship. It's between 2 people. So if integrity, ability doesn't sit in the relationship, something must sit in the relationship to make a difference. Am I right? And that is benevolence. All right? So good intentions towards me, caring for me, and let me tell you a bunch of very interesting stories that I had in my research when we were trying to understand what makes for trustworthy relationship. So I did a bunch of studies in Singapore. We interviewed Chinese businessmen. All right, so Chinese people, they are imbued with this Confucius values. Confucius as in the sage, Confucius not as in confused, all right? So I interviewed them and I said, okay, so what makes you trust somebody? And how do you do it? So this man looked at me and he said, you know what I do? I go visit his family during Chinese New Year. I said, okay, You decide whether you want to trust somebody by visiting somebody's family during Chinese New Year. And what do you see in there? And he said, well, you know what I do is I looked at how he treats his parents. I'm like, what? What has, treating your parents got to do with trusting this person at work? And he said, for me it's very important. If the guy is filial and good to the parents, then I am going to trust him because I know he will be able to, be trustworthy. Does it change the way you think? Does it create this thing in you, this dissonance? Well, when I first heard it, I go like, no. How does that happen? How do people do this? You go home, look at the guy and how he treats his family, and then comes back and says, I can trust you at work. It doesn't make sense to me. All right? So for a long time, I was trying to understand why. And it turns out, all right, what is really interesting is this. All right? We found in that piece of work, number one, trust occurs in very informal settings. It's not at work. It's at home. Number two, trust actually occurs within relationships and a lot of what we call role obligations. Like filial piety is very big for the Chinese. It's about, hey, if I'm a daughter, I have to take care of my parents, I have to be filial to them, and I'm fulfilling my role relationships. But more interestingly, the Chinese they have all these wonderful things to say. That says that trust is about good character. And what's good character? It's not integrity, diligence. What? Being diligent? Yeah, maybe. Perseverance. Thriftiness. What has thriftiness got to do with trust? But in the Chinese mind, that's what it does. All right? And the end of it, filial piety. So I looked at the piece of work and I go like, that's not what we think of where I come from. Because guess what? I did my PhD in America. In America, as you would know, the first thing they think about when they think of trust, you know what they think of? They said in organizations, I trust you. You know what they think of? They think of ability. All right? The fact that you can do the job. The others are a little bit more secondary. So I said, well, that's not how it is in Asia. So let's do more work. And guess where I went? Well, I went to Turkey. Oops, it's not moving. I went to Turkey. I didn't go to Turkey. I have a Turkish co-author. And I went to China, and we did a whole bunch of similar research. All right? And guess what we found? Again, as it turns out, it's not about ability. It's not about integrity. It's about benevolence. It's about how people watch out for each other. But even more interesting, we found something else. What is that? So let me tell you another story. Not so much about this piece of research, but this story is about a friend of mine who's an Indian national. So he lived in Australia for a number of years. He worked for this MNC, and he has a certain way of interacting with his people. And in Australia, people are more forward, and they will debate issues at work. Am I right? You're Australians. Yeah? If there's an issue, a debate, and you will discuss, and it's great, because at 4 o'clock, what do? Go drinking. Am I right? Yeah. So this gentleman was very interesting. He's an Indian friend of mine. He said, well, I want to move to Singapore because, hey, guess what? I want to be closer to India. From Singapore to India, anywhere in India is about 3.5 hours away. It's better. So he asked for transfer to Singapore. So he asked for transfer, same company, same culture, he thinks, in Singapore, and he was there for a while. And then he called me up one day, and he said, Hwee, you are a professor, right? I said, yeah. You're a professor in people management? I said, yes. And he said, well, can you tell me how to work with Singaporeans? And I looked at him and I said, what do you mean? What's wrong with Singaporeans? Can't you work with them? And he said, you know what? Same deal. At work, we debate about issues, we talk to each other, and I think he came across as a little bit assertive at those debates. And he said, after that, nobody will go to lunch with me, nobody will talk to me, everybody walked around me. I have no friends in Singapore. Now, if you are him, what are you going to do? Think again, yeah? He said, nobody wants to talk to me. Nobody wants to tell me anything now. Well, you see, when we study cultures and how countries, nationalities are one, different from another, what we found really interesting was that there are countries where people categorize and, puts you into different boxes. So there's Hwee at work and Hwee at home. There are countries where, there's no such thing as Hwee at home, Hwee at work. It's just Hwee, one person. We cannot box it out. All right, and guess what Singapore is? Singapore is Hwee as one person. All right, so if you were to discuss and talk to me about my work and challenge me and debate, I see it as you trying to do what? Trying to do what? Trying to get to me and trying to disagree with me, and you are after me. And so what? I am not going to tell you anything. I'm not going to work with you. Well, maybe we'll have to do work, but I don't care. After work, no lunch, no dinner, no drinks, no going to the bar tonight, no such thing. All right, so this gentleman did not realize that, relationships like this, especially in the Asian context, that trust actually is very porous. It flows from your personal domain into your professional, or your professional into the personal. And you know what happened to him? The epilogue is not a very happy one. He actually left Singapore. He said, I just can't work in Singapore. It's just not for me. I don't know how to interact with them, and he left. All right? And you will ask me, and I would ask you to think about, hey, if you were him, would you rather stay? And if you want to stay, how would you build that relationship? All right? So interestingly enough, that's what we found. Benevolence is key. Trust boundaries are porous. There's a movement from personal to professional, professional to personal. Now, so looking back, all that was said this morning, ability is important, benevolence is important, integrity. And in Asia, where you are now, benevolence is most important. Am I right? Yeah? What would you do today when you meet somebody for the first time and trying to build a relationship? I don't know. So let me tell you one more very interesting study that we did. So about 5 years ago, me and a bunch of researchers, please humor me because we think about research all the time. So what we did was we got a bunch of grant money from the US Air Force Office of Research. They actually gave us money to study trust. All right? And very interestingly enough, we are the only people who study trust in people. I went to the conference with the US Air Force folks. You know what they study? Almost all the researchers were studying trust in drones and robots and equipment. And we're like, wow, I thought trust was with people, but you actually trust machines? But anyhow, so what we did was we collected data from about 30 countries all over the world, all right, represented by all 6 continents. So if you see those countries highlighted in green, they're the ones where we have more than 30 observations, meaning we collected data from more than 30 people. Those in red are fewer than 30. So we have quite a number of countries put together. And so our question, interestingly enough, was this. If you were to think about trusting somebody, which is more important for you? Ability, benevolence, or integrity? And which part of the world would people emphasize different attributes or different factors of trustworthiness? All right, so going into the research, our thinking was, well, in the Asian and more collectivistic societies, all right, that's when we think benevolence is going to be most important. Am I right? In other countries, probably ability, probably integrity. Do you think we found that? Well, except for a country called Ethiopia. So we collected data from Ethiopia, but Ethiopia's data was all over the place. Except for Ethiopia, we actually found that only one thing matters. One thing, nothing else. Not benevolence. Not benevolence. Then you would tell me Hoon is also not ability. As it turns out, no matter where in the world, or at least in the data we've collected in the last few years, no matter where in the world, among those 29 countries you go to, ability is not as important, benevolence is not as important. The most important attribute is integrity. The fact that you walk the talk, you do what's right, and you always are fair, and you watch out for the bigger interests of the group. Surprising? Well, we're very surprised because we are trying to write it up for publication now. And we think, there are potentially a few reasons for that. Perhaps number one, we collected the data in this wonderful time of ours where we have Donald Trump, We have Brexit. All right, everything else around the world, makes integrity very salient. So that could be a function of that. But regardless of it, we still believe that this is where we are going to do most of our research in. That means when you meet people for the first time, when you want to build relationships, perhaps being able to deliver, all right, and walking the talk goes a long way. All right? So far, so good? So far, so good? All right, having said that, this is what I do. But there's another bunch of research out there that looks at, how different cultures are different and how they look for different things. So let me tell you a few more stories about what people think. So one of the other thing is looking at groups, looking at people, looking at cultures. And we found that actually there are cultures that can be divided into two big groups. All right, we have what we call the individualistic culture. Like I said just now, for example, America is individualistic, Germany is individualistic, versus the Asian cultures, they're more collectivistic. All right, so, and we found very interestingly that, when it is, so there are self-orientation versus group orientation. In those two different types of cultures, what is most important? We found that actually ability makes a big deal. All right, that people in self-oriented cultures focus a lot on ability when they think of making trust happen. So you're meeting Americans think ability. Perhaps you want to think along those ideas when you build trust. All right? So that's one. Second one that we're thinking of is there are also societies where, there's a lot of solidarity, people cooperate, they are very harmonious, and people express feelings more readily. Are there those societies? Which ones would that be? Thailand? Perhaps? All right, Germany? Maybe not. And there are societies, like I said, where it's more confrontational. People have independent thoughts. They look for things that are directed at individual benefit and well-being. In those kind of societies, when you think about what is more important, we found, or the research that's done, found that actually is benevolence. Benevolence is more important when we are in societies where people are all about collaboration, cooperativeness, wanting to help each other. All right? The third one. Very interestingly enough, let me talk about this third one. The third one, in societies where there's a huge, what we call power distance. People at the top are different from people at the bottom in terms of status and in terms of, decision making. And we found that in such societies, guess what? It's all about integrity, because guess what? Conflict and opportunism always happens when the context is high power distance. All right? And we found that integrity makes a lot of difference. Now, I want to talk about the last one. I don't want to show you the slide first. How many of you have been to Singapore? Great. What do you think of Singapore? Clean? Warm? Humid? Huh? Say again? Secure. Very good. Very secure, very safe. Nothing will happen if you walk down the street at 1 in the morning. But more importantly, think Singapore as a country. So how many of you have been to the Botanic Gardens? It's UNESCO. Mostly ladies, I found. All right. In the Botanic Gardens, there's this place called the Orchid Garden. So the Orchid Garden is where we breed orchids. When dignitaries come to Singapore, we name the orchids after them. And if you walked around in the Orchid Garden, the very interesting thing is this. There are signs, all right, that they put all around the garden, and the signs say what? Please take a picture here. And you go like, why would they tell you where to take the picture? Don't we pick places we like? Why do we need signs like this? And you know what? As it turns out, it's because my guess is this, that, we're afraid you will stand at the wrong angle, you will not pose with the right orchids, we're so afraid you'll do the wrong things, we make sure you do the right things. That's Singapore for you, right? Yes. So this is what we call a high uncertainty avoidant country. All right, so there are cultures where people are afraid of ambiguity. We just want to make sure you get it right. This is the picture. This is where you stand. Don't go anywhere else. All right, and if you look at countries like Singapore, what's unique about them is that because we are so afraid of ambiguity, we do something to manage the ambiguity. What do? What do we do to manage ambiguity, unknown, something that we cannot foresee? What do? We create rules, regulation, processes, laws, so that no matter what contingency you come up with, we know how to react. Am I right? Yes, we are so afraid of ambiguity. Now I know you're saying, no, but that's not Singapore. Singapore is big into innovation. Well, when you are highly afraid of uncertainty, you tend not to take risks. So we're trying very hard to educate our younger folks to take risks. But anyway, coming back to Singapore. So in a country like Singapore, if you want to build trust with Singaporeans who are so afraid of uncertainty, what do you do? What do you do? Well, I'll suggest this. You do what I call, predictability. Be predictable. Help them know ahead of time what you're going to do so that they can trust you for that. All right? So this is what we meant when we said, the society has low tolerance for ambiguity. Just when people are from that kind of society, that's one of the bases for building trust. Having said all this, I've told you about cultures, how we're different, how we build trust. But at the end of today, even if you walk out of the room singing the song about Rose, I hope you will remember one more thing. That when you think of building trust, we think of ability, benevolence, integrity. So, are there other factors that will make trust building a lot faster, quicker, more effective? I'd like to suggest yes, and these are really within your means to control. So let me suggest two things. Number one, what I call, so you see those two pictures, right? What do you think I'm going to show you? What do you think the words will be coming out from those two pictures? The one on the top left. The man's looking into the mirror, right? And he sees many copies of himself. Am I right? Do you like seeing copies of yourself? No? Yes. Who doesn't like to look in the mirror and see themselves? Even little kids do that, no? All right, so let me say this, that when we think of building trust, perhaps the first thing in a new relationship, you're here for the first time, you don't know anybody, think of what I call similarity. Similarity. Because when you walk into a room full of strangers, what's the first thing that went through your head? Do you see strangers as different or similar? Do we see more differences or similarity in general? Differences, right? So the key is this. How can we find similarity? How can we find the point where we can have a common conversation? So last night, I was all by myself. I only know Yana and nobody else. I walked into the reception, and I was walking everywhere, and I decided I'll plonk myself in front of the stage. All right, so I was having my dinner, and then, I went and got my food, come back, and found this gentleman at the table that I was at, and we started talking. And where's Martin? Is Martin here? Martin's not here this morning. So there's a gentleman called Martin, and from Scotland. Is he here? Well, he must have drank too much already. So Martin started talking to me, and I said, "Oh, Martin, where are you from?" And Martin said, "Oh, I'm at UAE. I'm in Abu Dhabi." And I said, "Oh, UAE." Then I suddenly said, "Well, I went and taught in Al Ain in UAE last year." And he said, "Oh, yeah, okay." Then I said, "What do you do?" He said, "Oh, I run conference centers for exhibitions and stuff." And you know what? Last year, when I was in Al Ain, I was teaching a bunch of Emiratis from the water and electricity company, and we were teaching it in his convention center. So I said, wow, what a small world. And when we started talking about what it's like living in the Middle East, what it's like living in Scotland, and then we had a conversation, and we went on and on and on. And so I thought I know Martin, and Martin actually at the end of the evening said to me, "Well, if you need any tips for tomorrow, just come talk to me." I was thinking he might be here, but anyhow, so the deal is, oops, don't tell him that I talk about Martin. But the deal is, if we can find some similarities to talk about, all right, let me say, this is the first thing to building a relationship. All right? But that, I tell you, is not enough. Why? Because the second picture, what does that say? Can you guess what the second picture is all about? Huh? Spark. Chemistry? Spark? Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Maybe my picture is not very good. Actually, the second picture what I wanted to show was reciprocity. reciprocity. The fact that, see, whenever we get into networking events like this, the first thing we always think about is, what can I get out of this? Am I right? True? When we think of networking, we think of it as being very transactional. Tit for tat, I do something for you, you do something for me. But the deal is this, all right, that all of us are wired within us for reciprocity. In all the social science research we have found is that when somebody does something for you, you have a very strong obligation to return that thing. So if I smile at you, what would you do? I hope so, because this is very fundamentally who we are as human beings. All right? And let me say this. Instead of saying, let me take and see what I can get from the relationship, in this big networking event, let us maybe say, how can I start by giving somebody? If I can identify something that will help somebody, maybe we can start a virtuous cycle of what I call good relationship that is of trustworthiness. All right? And in fact, if you think about, human beings and all that, giving and taking is fundamental. Remember, I didn't say taking and giving. I said giving and taking. And in fact, there's a gentleman, an academic at Wharton by the name of Adam Grant, and he has a book called Give and Take. All right? And he proposed that if all of us can start by giving, all right, before we take, that actually will help with society. That actually will also help with our well-being. All right? So let me say that we always, when we think about trust, we go through stages. The first stage is I look at you look at me, I give you something, I try to assess, pros and cons, benefits and costs. All right? So that is the fundamental level that we start our relationship with. But let me say, with more time, with more knowledge, we move on to what we call knowledge-based trust. And the ultimate nirvana, all right, let me say, of trust is when we have identification-based trust. Meaning, I identify with you, I feel that you and I can, make decisions knowing you will make probably the same ones. We are one. Does that ever happen? I don't know, you tell me, no, I don't think so. Even with my spouse, it never happened. Maybe not, but we can aspire to go towards that. And can I say, at the end of it all, and like just now when Charles was talking about how, when a team comes together and they feel safe to create and co-create, let me say the underlying reason for feeling safe, all right, psychologically to create and co-create is because they trust each other. They trust each other. All right? If you have been looking at the organizational literature lately, one word stands out a lot, a term that was popularized by Google. Google actually did a project called Project Aristotle. Don't ask me why Aristotle. In fact, they have a project earlier called Project Oxygen. All right? So Project Aristotle answers a very interesting question. The question is, what makes an effective team? All right, and the number one thing that they found in their research that makes an effective team in Project Aristotle, that is looking at all the Google employees, is the idea called psychological safety. Let me say again, not physical safety, right? We come into the room today knowing nothing is going to fall of us and we're going to die. We know that we are safe physically, but are we safe psychologically? All right, meaning when we say somebody is safe psychologically, we mean we feel safe in terms of taking what I call interpersonal risks. That means I feel like I can be silly, I can be myself, I can tell you things knowing you're not going to judge me. All right, of course, you guys are sitting out there judging me now, right? No? Do I feel safe? Yeah, I think I feel quite safe. So let me say, for that to happen, trust has to come around. All right, only when I trust you can I feel psychologically safe. All right, and let me just end off this conversation by one last thing, which is, if you think about what trust can do for you, like I said, one is to give you psychological safety, but more importantly, it reduces the complexity of social life. All right, what it helps us is in information sharing, right? Remember just now I keep asking you, would you share information with John? Would you share information with Jerry? Would you share information with Alex? That's because when you trust, you would share information, you will collaborate a little bit more, you will give first before you take, and more importantly, you will feel safe with each other. All right, and with that, I want to thank you for being a wonderful audience because you're all there watching it, and thank you very much.